Let me read to you a passage from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 10, verse 28 to 33. It's the Gospel for what the Church calls the memorial of St. John Fisher and St. Thomas More, which falls on June the 22nd. St. Matthew writes, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven." That's from Matthew chapter 10, verse 28 to 33. It prompts thoughts about the supreme sacrifice. What do I mean? Well, there have been numbers of persons in history who have faced and passed through death because of their convictions. Those convictions have been of greater or lesser moral value, and accordingly their sacrifice has been judged variously. Ultimately, the value of a person's sacrifice of life and property has stood on the value of his convictions and his behaviour. For instance, the death of an extremist Islamic suicide bomber who enters a crowded part of the city and detonates his bomb, sending himself and those around him to their deaths, is despised and condemned, as is his sincerity and his convictions. A father, however, who dives into the sea to rescue his struggling son and then loses his life in the process is regarded with the highest praise. There has always been a recognition that the giving of one's life for a noble reason is truly admirable. But I would propose that it was Jesus Christ who, more than any other, established this high benchmark in human history and culture. Muhammad did not die a martyr, but in his bed at the end of a fairly long and successful life, surrounded by his wives and held in honour by his followers as the prophet. The Buddha did not give his life for his high cause, nor did Confucius, nor did Zoroaster. Christ died on the cross, crucified, in witness to the truth of his person and teaching, and he said, "Those who love the truth listen to his voice." He promised his disciples the same general upshot. They must be prepared to renounce themselves, take up their cross every day, and follow in his footsteps. That cross was the means and the result of his and their bearing witness to the truth, and he himself is the way, the truth, and the life. Yes, it was Christ who set this lofty benchmark that has come to be called martyrdom, although this word has been debased and used for the worst forms of loss of life. Christ did not see his death as he's being trapped and overcome by his opponents, being suddenly grabbed and done away with. It was the high point of his life. It was predicted by the Scriptures as the means to glory for himself and for all. In the plan of God, the Messiah had to suffer. So, both the Scriptures before him and he himself in his teaching and actions set forth death as the summit of life's mountain. It was not just a terrible mishap. It was life's main accomplishment, the supreme achievement and source of immense fruit. This, in the annals of history, is a somewhat new idea and has had great influence on human thought. To take one example from our two saints for today, Thomas More, who lived from 1478 to 1535, was Lord Chancellor of England to King Henry VIII from October 1529 to the 16th of May 1532. He was a powerful literary opponent of the Protestant Reformation, and in particular of Martin Luther and William Tyndale. He refused to sanction Henry's demand to be recognised as supreme head of the Church of England in the Act of Supremacy of 1534. In that year, he was imprisoned for his refusal to take the oath required by the First Succession Act, because that act, in effect, rejected papal authority and the papal declaration of the validity of Henry's marriage to Queen Catherine of Aragon. At the beginning of July 1535, Thomas More was tried and convicted on perjured testimony. They could not get the better by legal means of the best lawyer in the land. Immediately following his sentence, he declared the reason why his conscience forbade him to do as the king had demanded. I quote, "No temporal lord could or ought to be head of the spirituality," he said. Further, there can be, and I quote, "no authority without the common consent of all Christians to make a law or act of Parliament or Council against the union of Christendom." He stood, he said, by all the general councils for 1,000 years. On the scaffold, he said that he, and I quote, "died in and for the faith of the Holy Catholic Church, a faithful servant both of God and the King." Well, his death sent a shock of horror and indignation through the whole of Christendom, including even Henry VIII, who turned upon Anne Boleyn with the words, "Thou art the cause of this man's death." Erasmus saluted Thomas More as one, I quote, "whose soul was more pure than any snow, whose genius was such that England never had and never again will have its like." 2 centuries later, Jonathan Swift said that More was, I quote, "the person of the greatest virtue this kingdom ever produced," a sentiment with which Samuel Johnson agreed. Historian Hugh Trevor Roper said in 1977 that More was, and I quote, "the first great Englishman whom we feel that we know, the most human of saints." One of the most notable things in the letters of St. Thomas More is his reference to the conscience. In effect, conscience was the echo of the voice of God, uttering the truth which he, the most prudent and careful of thinking men heard and obeyed. Conscience is, as Cardinal Newman would write nearly 350 years later, after More, the, and I quote, aboriginal vicar of Christ. Hearing the voice of his conscience, Thomas More knew he was hearing the voice of Jesus Christ. It was a cause of profound distress to him that his own beloved family, and he was an absolutely exemplary husband and father, could not understand him. Even his daughter Meg chose to swear the oath, though we know that in her case the qualification, so far as the law of God allows, was tolerated, but he went forward to make the supreme sacrifice, following in the footsteps of the Master whom he loved above all and who had set the benchmark. Greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command. Well, Christ was Thomas More's friend.